The story begins with a tale of a silver wolf that supposedly roams the castle grounds. A guard, who is well aware of these rumors, makes his rounds. But the night watchman thinks it's just a fairy tale. Suddenly, he notices a strange figure trying to hide from the lamplight in the bushes. He does not respond to the guard's calls. At this time of night, there should be no strangers in the garden. A white-haired young man appears before the guard, his naked body covered in bloody streaks. The boy looks familiar. The guard decides not to shine his light on him and simply leave. Guests gathered in the throne room. They greeted the ruler and his wife on the holiday. His Majesty was celebrating his birthday today. Jan Walencia had been the emperor of Kalaimu for a long time. This year, he was pleased with the gifts. Aristocrats and representatives of neighboring states presented him with many precious items. They also sent works of art and various kinds of jewelry. Those present parted before the girl walking down the central aisle of the hall. The guests thought that she would also be present this year, although no one wanted to see her here. No one was happy about this person's presence. Some noticed that the uninvited guest was dressed in mourning. Therefore, they began to say that the girl was not quite herself. She could have been more polite and not returned to her shameful deed. The girl's name was Adele Oswald, and she was the Marquise's former wife. She was carrying a box that looked more like an urn for ashes. No one understood why the ruler had invited her back. Adele herself understood that she had received the invitation only because of her marriage to her late husband, who had been a loyal servant of the emperor, although he had never managed to attain a more important position. But to everyone around her, Adele Oswald was a thief. She wanted to be better than she was. People gossiped that, in order to raise her social status, she had no qualms about marrying the Marquis and waiting for him to die. Some even said that Adele had deliberately poisoned her husband. To make matters worse, the widow, obsessed with lust, seduced her stepson and tried to have an affair with him and make him hers. Adele paid no attention to the gossip and ill will toward her. After all, none of those who discussed her knew the true situation, so the girl did not get angry with them and ignored their whispering. The Marquis's widow brought a gift to the emperor. He noted the originality of the girl's outfit. She replied that despite different perceptions, the color black symbolized harmony and inner peace. In fact, the girl had altered her only dress in order to attend the ball. However, meaning is more important than outward appearance. After all, it is better to be considered a heretic or an improper girl. In this aristocratic society, it was better to be someone who was talked about but feared than to appear poor and wrong. In this world, the rules of the jungle prevailed, where you either eat or be eaten. Adele had already gotten used to the fact that her reputation actually preceded her, but she had gotten used to it and didn't pay any attention to it. From the very beginning, everyone treated her with suspicion and contempt. The ruler asked what the Marquise wanted to give him as a gift. Adele replied that she was giving him sweets. The nobles laughed at her. After all, this gift was in no way comparable to what they had given, but the girl paid no attention to them. She said that she had prepared them according to her own recipe and that they were very different from the sweets usually served at the table of a monarch. The emperor was intrigued. He and his wife listened attentively and looked at the Marquise. Each time she came with something unusual and interesting that went beyond what ordinary aristocrats and subjects did. The empress allowed herself to ask if the late Marquis also liked the desserts his wife made. Adele replied that she had started cooking after her husband's death to ease her grief. The girl added that if he were alive, he would have loved her cooking, and he would have spared the imperial family the delicacies and sent them precious gifts instead of such luxury. Adele advised him to throw away her gift if it was so unpleasant to the empress, but before doing so, he should consult with His Majesty about this act. The emperor did not dare to try it yet. A young man approached through the hall. He walked confidently and asked if he could be the first to try the Marquise's desserts. It was Count Bays, the right hand of His Majesty the Emperor, his faithful assistant and comrade in arms. Adele had heard of this man. He was the most desirable man in the empire. He was a distinguished hero of many wars and a hero who had done many great deeds for his country and his ruler. Bays was a role model, and yet he had remained alone all this time. It was hard to believe, but no woman or girl had been able to capture his heart or subdue him with her will or beauty. But everyone was captivated by his beauty. People gossiped and discussed that the Count owned several gold and silver mines, and, in addition, he had one of the richest banks in the empire at his disposal, which he used when necessary. The emperor's behavior changed. He had been cold-blooded and focused, but with the appearance of his loyal vassal, he became softer. It was clear that His Majesty greatly valued Count Bays and trusted him as he trusted himself. Bays leaned toward the box of sweets that Adele was still holding. The man smiled at her and asked where to start. Finally, he made his choice, and the Marquise looked at him in awe. After tasting, the Count said that it was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted in his life. The Emperor said that he had not expected such praise, as he did not consider Bays to be an expert on sweets and the like. Bays joked that he only ate raw meat on the battlefield and after a bloody battle, but this time the Emperor could trust him and try the desserts of the Marquise Adele, who could be trusted and talked to. His Majesty tasted the sweets and then declared to the entire hall that such delicacies could not be enjoyed alone. He called the guests to try the delicacy and share their impressions. Everyone agreed that it was very tasty. The Count approached the girl. He asked if she would like to be his partner. Adele could only reply that she agreed, because it was a great honor for her to become the partner of such a distinguished person. Adele thought about events that had happened 10 years ago. Back then, a little boy, the son of a mine worker, had been pestering her. Bays was very similar to him, but he simply couldn't be real. But as she looked more closely at the Count's features, she realized that if Chris had grown up, he would have been just like him. His movements and mannerisms also reminded her of that boy. The Count leaned over the girl and asked how many years had passed since their last meeting. A strange feeling came over Adele. She realized who was really standing in front of her. Now everything was falling into place, and the girl felt uncomfortable for some reason. The Marquise asked Chris how he ended up here and why he defended the girl. He corrected her and said that she should now address him as Count Christian Bays. After all, no one was supposed to know about their acquaintance. But when they were alone or far away from everyone, she could call him what she had called him before. The young man added that he owed her a lot. It all started with their first dance when she was teaching him. At that time, the little girl took a liking to dancing with him, although the son of a poor worker did not understand why he should do it and why he should learn it. Chris often stepped on her foot on purpose and made fun of her. 10 long years later, he became a completely different person. The Count noticed the girl's distress. Adele didn't have the courage to ask what had happened to the boy over the years, and she resigned herself to it. The Marquise replied that she simply hadn't danced in a long time and had forgotten a lot. Chris replied that in that case, it was time for him to repay his debt and help with today's dance. Adele could appreciate her old student. The girl realized that the Count's movements were the same as those of the boy with whom they had danced 10 years ago. Adele realized that she hadn't felt this good in a very long time. She didn't want to go home. On the way home, the girl didn't know what to do with herself. Her friend noticed her strange change in behavior. Mia Bonita, Adele's loyal friend and the Baron's wife, asked what had happened to her friend at the ball. After that evening, Adele had become a completely different person. She reacted badly to what her friend said to her. Only now could they talk and relax. Mia was interested in the details of the reception and the banquet. She said she had heard something from the guests, but she didn't want to believe the gossip. She would rather hear everything from her friend. She was even more concerned that no one had dared to insult the Marquise again. After all, there was one problematic person. They were talking about a girl named Sierra who was always trying to annoy the girl. Adele replied that this time everything had gone peacefully. No one said anything bad to anyone, everyone just enjoyed the dessert. Mia believed her, but asked if something had happened at the dinner after all. Her friend was not her usual self. The Marquise always left palace receptions early, but this time she was having a particularly hard time leaving. Today, Adele was tired and confused. It seemed as if she had fallen in love with someone. Mia realized that she had solved the mystery. Could it be that the young man she had fallen in love with was the Count? Her friend was shocked that Adele had danced with him. After all the women in the empire dreamed of the Count even smiling at them. But she had to forget her love for him because he was getting married soon. Mia told her that he was to marry Princess April. The emperor needed such a son-in-law to defend the throne. After all, the ruler's son was too weak for this. The hope was for a hero of the empire. But perhaps an even greater threat to the emperor was the Council of Elders. It consisted of representatives of the 5 most influential families in the state. His Majesty himself could not often cope with them or convince them. The Oswald family, of which Adele was a member, also had a place there. The ruler hoped that his son-in-law would use his armed forces to bring the aristocrats to submission. But now the girl was thinking about her own affairs. Her mood had soured. A maid named Tanya ran into the room. She announced loudly that they had a guest at such a late hour. A large, richly decorated carriage was approaching the estate. If they were unwelcome guests, they would simply be sent away. The girls calmed down and looked closely at the carriage that pulled up to the house. The seal on the door was unfamiliar to them. None of the noble houses of the empire had anything like it in their coats of arms. Adele was the first to be surprised. It was Chris. The young man walked as if he were afraid of something and looked around carefully. He was holding a gorgeous bouquet of flowers in his hands. The Marquise wondered what her friend had forgotten at her house and how he had found out about it. Finally, they spoke. The young man asked why she had simply left him that day. The girl replied that she was very afraid that someone might notice how her heart was trembling and how nervous she was. Adele added that she just wanted to give her gift to the emperor and go home. But Chris's appearance confused her. She really liked him, but he spent the whole evening talking to other guests. But Chris still thought that she was to blame. After all, she didn't say goodbye, she just left, abandoning him again. The boy's words betrayed an old hurt. He asked her how she had lived all these years and why she looked so unhappy at the ball. The girl and her friend looked around the room carefully. There were lots of flowers, but it turned out that there weren't many everyday items. Christian noticed this and said he would bring some next time. The young man asked Adele if he could visit her again. She replied that it was not a good idea, as it was a small town and everyone knew everyone. He asked if a widow could not have a guest in her home. The Marquise replied that of course he could come. After all, he was a very close and good friend to her. She considered him almost a brother. He leaned over her and asked what the problem was. Adele began to back away and stumbled a little. She almost fell if Christian hadn't caught her. He asked if she was really that afraid of him. The girl replied that he had simply come too close. Christian took her by the chin and asked her not to look away, as it was very hurtful to him. It made him seem like he was repulsive to her. Adele gave in. She began to understand where this was going. The girl took Chris's cheeks in her hands and pulled them apart. She added that Chris was still the little boy who used to run after her as a child and never left her side like a tail. The Count replied that she was still the little girl who went crazy for delicious apple pie and tried not to hurt anyone and always smiled her beautiful, unique smile. The young man came even closer. He asked if childhood memories haunted them both. Then Adele should remember who got his first kiss. At this, the widow couldn't take it anymore. She was afraid someone would see them. The girl pushed Christian away and asked him to stop. He stood there with his tongue sticking out comically and asked her to explain her behavior. She added that it wasn't a kiss at all and that he could barely breathe at the time. Adele reminded him that he had almost suffocated and she had to give him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. When she managed to save him, she touched him with her lips and kissed him lightly out of joy. The young man couldn't take it. He said she was very stubborn. Adele remembered her childhood because she used to call him that too. For some reason, memories came flooding back to them. He may have grown up physically, but his emotions remained the same. Finally, they both calmed down, and Adele added wood to the fire. She was preparing for a long conversation with her childhood friend because they had a lot to figure out and decide. Adele said she was very happy to see him here, but after this evening, he should not show up here. Besides, he had arrived in a very expensive and large carriage. Unnecessary rumors could only harm her and give rise to new gossip. The girl added that nothing good would come of it. Christian asked if she thought so because she had poisoned her husband. Adele asked how long he had known about it and why he had kept quiet before. Christian said that he didn't care about the rumors about Adele. Her reputation would in no way affect his reputation, but he could help the girl improve her situation and position in society. The girl asked how Christian had become an aristocrat and a nobleman. He replied that he had brought glory to his imperial majesty. They hadn't seen each other for 10 years, so they could at least have dinner together. The girl replied that they would have to wait for dinner. She had nothing decent to eat. He replied that he was used to eating everything, So now he was very hungry and ready to eat whatever was served. Christian remembered a conversation he had had with his boss earlier. The man had shown him a picture of the Marquis's wife and told him to try to get in touch with her, as she had documents bearing his signature. The stranger asked the Count if this would cause him any problems. His reaction did not provide a clear answer to this question. Chris thought about the fact that 10 years had passed since the Marquis's death, and his partner was still trying to find the deceased's documents. It turned out that it was not a simple document. It was worth a lot, so it could be bargained for very well. Help Adele. The man asked only to be friends with Adele, nothing more. After all, April could find out about this scheme, and the wedding with the princess could be called off. And Christian had become almost part of their strong and friendly family. Adele prepared soup for her guest, but Christian fell asleep right on the couch. The hostess thought she should wake him up, because when the soup cooled down, it wouldn't taste good. The girl looked at Chris for a long time. The poor girl remembered the events that had taken place 10 years ago on the Garden River. She was rushing to Christian because she was late helping her mother. The boy would be angry that she had crossed the river. But Adele simply couldn't leave him hungry. Besides, the river seemed completely frozen and the ice was thick and solid. It would surely hold the weight of a little girl. But then something terrible happened. The girl fell into the water. She slowly sank to the bottom. Even in such a situation, she still thought about her friend. As she lost consciousness, she thought she heard Christian's voice calling her. She came to when she and Christian were already on land. The girl tried to bring him to consciousness. The boy was lying on the snow and wasn't breathing. She had no choice but to kiss him, hoping for a miracle. After that, the young man opened his eyes. He saw his girlfriend's tear-stained face in front of him. He asked her why she was crying. She replied that she thought she might lose Chris. He reassured Adele with tender words. They hugged each other, trying to warm each other with their body heat. The children's lips were blue, and it seemed that their hearts would stop beating in the cold. Then, what they had been arguing about earlier happened. Whether it was the cold or the high temperature, they began to kiss. It was difficult for them to stop, and no matter how hard Adele tried to remain silent, she was sure that it was a real kiss. Adele did not notice when she fell asleep. When she woke up, her guest was not at home. He left her without even saying goodbye, as was customary. She could not be angry with him. Count Bays was riding in a carriage. He was talking to his assistant. The latter asked how the lady had reacted to the gift of flowers. It seemed that everything had gone well. But why had Christian left the lady's company so quickly? The assistant persisted. He asked what kind of relationship the Count had with the late Marquis's wife. After all, many people said that they had known each other since childhood. He replied that she was like a sister to him. Christian took his face in his hands and added that she was also to blame for him turning into a wild beast, especially when a blizzard was raging outside the window. It was hard for him to be near her and breathe in the scent of her body. At one time, the captain of the White Ghosts reported to the Count that Adele had agreed to marry a much older Marquis in order to gain money and social status. Later, a disaster struck. After 2 years of marriage, she allegedly poisoned him. No solid evidence was found, but just in case, they decided to banish her from her husband's estate. The Count found this hard to believe. After all, in families like the Oswalds, a murderer would not be simply banished. He would be severely punished and spend the rest of his life in prison or pay with his life for attempting to kill a member of the family. The assistant also told him about rumors of a possible affair with the Marquis's son, which was the reason for the poisoning. But Christian did not want to listen any further. He believed that it was necessary to find out everything for himself. The young man who had served Christian faithfully said that he was ready to conduct a more detailed investigation into what had happened. He insisted that the Count could rely on him. The young man also noticed that his master had feelings for Adele. The Count replied that there was no need to rush. After all, if she wanted the truth, she would have asked for help long ago. This was very unexpected for the captain. He did not think that his master really did not want to help his friend. Christian said that he did not love the girl. In fact, he despised anyone who betrayed their friends, let alone their loved ones. So there was no point in trying to help the girl, even if she was not to blame. In the morning, the girl's friends came to see her and found her alone. The guest had left long ago and the fire had burned out. The girls asked if it was really Count Bays. After all, the most handsome man in the empire had visited their mistress. Mia said that when he arrived with flowers, he seemed serious. They still couldn't believe that the hero had come in person to see the girl for some reason that was important at first glance. The girl said that the young man was a war hero and that he commanded a squad of white ghosts, that is, an order of knights who were famous throughout the empire for their personal service to the ruler himself. Mia and her friend asked if the Count had asked the landlady out, or if he had proposed a serious relationship and marriage in a few months. Adele tried to explain to the two crazy girls that this was not the case. A messenger from the Emperor's palace entered the room. The mustachioed man said that the Empress herself had sent him because she liked the dessert. Therefore, he would be placing regular orders with Adele. The official handed her a contract, stating that she would supply them with sweets once a month. There were no special conditions. It was worth noting that aristocrats would also place orders after the Empress. Adele was delighted with the offer. She would no longer have to worry about her financial situation. This day was to be a special one for her. She would never receive such an offer again in her life. After that day, the flow of customers grew steadily. Ladies from wealthy noble families kept coming to the shop because even at home they continued to dream about the cookies that Adele baked. Gossip and rumors about the girl who supplied the Emperor's court with sweets spread very quickly. Even in the early hours of the morning, the girl now had no free time from customer orders. Business was improving. Often, young ladies from noble families had to be invited to the table, and they stayed for a long time until the hostess decided that it was time to prepare all the orders she had received. The guests constantly praised Adele. They were simply delighted with her talent for cooking. For the first time, the nobility and local aristocracy were so kind and gracious to her. But soon the conversation turned to her and the Count. The girls were curious about how she had met the future Count. After all, people were saying that he even came to her house. The rumors spread like wildfire and became more and more false. What was even more frightening was that recently everyone had been talking about the Count's marriage to a princess, the Emperor's daughter. And now everyone was gossiping about a romantic relationship between Bays and Lady Adele. There could be serious consequences from such rumors, so the housekeeper tried to prove to everyone that Bays was actually her younger brother. But Adele had recovered. He had been her friend since childhood, and over time had become like a younger brother to her. After her mother's death, Adele was forced to move to the estate where her father had served. After that, she lost contact with the Count for many years, but at the banquet, they suddenly and unexpectedly met again. Adele was handed a letter. The girl told her friend that this was a good chance to appear in public again. It was an invitation to a ball, and it would be better to take a friend or younger brother with her for company. Mia said she was ready to go with her friend, as they hadn't been to such events for a long time. The Count had to agree to be a partner for his good friend. After some persuasion, Adele agreed. After meeting with the nobles, the girl relaxed in Mia's company. Today had been a very difficult day. Adele didn't want to talk about what had happened at the reception. Instead, she talked about the order for the palace. Her friend emphasized that she wanted the girl to improve her relationship with the Count. Then they would be more powerful than the Oswald family. And then all the gossip about Adele's poisoning and disgraceful behavior would be in the past. Mia emphasized that married life with the old Marquis was not easy, so no one even dared to call her Mrs. Oswald. But she was still a young lady and could achieve a lot. Adele said that she had already managed to forget what had happened to her with the Oswald family. But in reality, this memory awakened in her a desire to take revenge and destroy those who had mocked her. A few days later, Mia and her mistress arrived at Madame Hans's palace. They were met by the butler, who asked them what they were there for. The girls replied that they had been invited to a party and had invitations. But even after that, they didn't like the man's reaction. He believed that these upstarts were not ready for such a serious event organized by his mistress. Such a meeting did not set a good tone. Behind the girl, she heard a familiar voice. It was Sarah, the daughter of the Marquis, who, according to rumors, had been poisoned by Adele herself. The girl turned to her and called her mother. The meeting did not promise anything good. Sarah and her companions approached Adele and asked if her mother knew about the special dress code, fur on dresses and outer garments. Even her servants were so beautiful. Sarah's guests mocked Adele and hinted that such clothes would be very expensive for her and unaffordable. After all, the Oswalds had left her without a penny despite all her hopes. The murderer had miscalculated. Mia and Adele felt awkward. Sira began to mock them and asked if they should borrow some decent clothes. The Marquis's wife suspected that they had been invited specifically to be mocked. Mia urged her mistress to leave before it was too late, but Adele did not want to do so. After all, doing so would only mean that they were personally at fault. They could not show weakness in front of these girls. Adele replied to the attackers that she personally did not need this dress, but that it might suit Mrs. Benita. After that, the girls no longer dared to mock and joke about the new arrivals, and meeting Count Bays gave them certain privileges in their current situation. Adele promised that she would definitely tell her friend about Mrs. Hans's hospitality and bring him along next time. Adele was left alone with the Countess. She asked the Marquis's daughter if it was her business to spread all these rumors that were preventing an innocent girl from living a normal life. But the girl said she was not really to blame. In fact, she was more concerned about whether the Count was really her brother, or whether she was just trying to divert suspicion from herself for safety's sake. After all, the Emperor's daughter would not be happy about her fiancé visiting Adele. Sira asked if her former mother could help her meet the Count. If so, she would stop doing all sorts of nasty things to her and would no longer bother her over nonsense. She was ready to forgive Adele. The Marquis's daughter promised that she would drop all charges against the girl. Adele asked what would change for her personally after that. After all, rumors and lies about her had been spread for 10 long years. Sira replied that the Count could become part of their family, and then they would become one of the most powerful families in the aristocracy. The Emperor would surely fall in this struggle, and then they would become the rulers. But Adele calmed the girl's ambitions. She explained that the Count's trust was based on the fact that he was a future member of the Emperor's family, and he would become the protector of the ruler's throne, not his mortal enemy. The Marquis's widow reminded her that the choice was obvious. After all, the daughter of a provincial marquis, albeit a powerful one in his time, was no match for the daughter of His Imperial Highness, the ruler of a powerful state. Sira angrily asked if her foster mother had any feelings for the boy. After all, she would not have spoken to the Count just like that, and he would not have come to her modest home. There was also a lot of gossip about their dance at the ball, and many believed that the girl looked at him in a way that a sister should not look at her younger brother. Adele replied that perhaps the Marquis's daughter did not like her very much and was therefore jealous. Adele asked why the Marquis's daughter was so interested in her. After all, so much concerned the girl and her life. Without Adele, she could not build her life as normal, happy people do. It seemed that Sira did not love her mother very much and was now trying to get her mother's love. But she was frightened by these words. It seemed that Adele was penetrating the deepest corners of her soul and mind. Sira became angry. She began to threaten that if her stepmother did not get her together with the Count, she would do something terrible. But the threats meant nothing. Adele had learned to distinguish between real threats and empty promises that were not backed up by action. The girl understood Sira's status in the Empire's society perfectly well. She was famous for her intrigues and gossip. If she didn't like someone, Sira would make sure that high society would not accept them. Her greatest success was poor Adele, who was accused of killing her husband and trying to seduce her stepson. Other ladies tried to avoid Sira so as not to offend her, but today the situation has changed dramatically. Adele became the center of attention of the girls who tried her sweets and desserts. They surrounded her and began to talk about her with admiration. Sira became even more angry with the widow. Sira couldn't bully Adele when there were so many other people around. Meanwhile, the girls moved on from sweets to a topic that interested them even more. They all asked if the Count would be coming today. Mia approached the hostess and showed her new outfit. The girl replied to the lady's question that she had chosen the most expensive dress. The girls laughed and decided to take a break to spite Sira and her escort. Adele grabbed the boy by the face. He looked at her furiously and said that he hadn't seen her in a long time and missed her very much. She was very frightened because she felt helpless. All this was just a momentary illusion. The girl thought that she couldn't have gotten drunk so quickly from a glass of wine. It was likely that something had been slipped into her wine, because the servant had handed her the glass personally and then disappeared. On her way to the exit, a stranger approached the girl. He offered his help and was convinced that she had no right to refuse. Adele began to realize with horror who he was. April Valencia was the most suitable match for Count Bays, and she was very fond of her future fiancé. Her plans were to build a strong family with the hero of the empire. Sira and Madame Hans came to visit her. The girl asked the guests why the marquise, who had been making such delicious desserts for the emperor himself, was not with them. Sira bowed. She said that the marquise was unable to attend the reception because she was spending time with Count Bays. This was not surprising, as according to many, it was not the first time this had happened. The princess and the girls, led by Sira, decided to go to the room where the count and the marquise were supposed to meet to check the information. They all gathered in front of the door. When they were about to open the door, strange sounds came from inside the room. They sounded like moans. It was surprising that the girl had definitely entered the room, but who was with her remained a mystery. The princess suggested postponing the visit to this room, but in fact, Sira had been planning this for a long time, so she had no right to refuse. With a fierce expression on her face, she opened the door and rushed into the room. Everything was supposed to be as she had planned, but the scene that unfolded before them was Count Eaton sitting naked on a chair, bound hand and foot. But why had this happened? Why had her plan failed? A few hours earlier, Christian had woken Adele. She couldn't understand what had happened to her. The boy was not ready to explain now because they had to act quickly and decisively to avoid problems. Adele tried to get up, but Chris assured her that she had a few minutes to rest and gather her strength. Otherwise, she would lose consciousness again and be unable to move. But she was curious about what had happened to her. When she finally came to, she thought that someone had poisoned her drink. But she had no proof of that yet. Her last memory was the face of Count Eaton, dragging her somewhere and threatening her. Adele was convinced that Christian had saved her once again. He smiled silently and looked at her intently. The Count assured her that she was once again in his debt. He added that she had been the victim of malicious intent. The girl took the dagger she always carried with her from the young man. In that case, Chris had saved her from committing a terrible crime against her late husband's son right in the emperor's palace. Adele hid the cold weapon in a special sheath attached to her leg. For a long time, the girl tried to hide the fact that she had this weapon. Chris said it was a nice accessory for a thief. For a moment, the young man took her hand in his and asked her to wait. He looked at her hand and then said that she needed to learn how to use such a weapon properly so as not to hurt herself or others. The girl replied that she carried the knife with her for self-defense. But today, the situation could have gotten out of control, and she could have caused a lot of trouble for herself and those around her, who still believed in her innocence. Adele thanked him once again for saving her life and reputation. Chris replied that he had done nothing. When the girl started waving the knife around, even he got scared. And then he knocked her out. However, it was very difficult to remove Eaton's clothes and tie him up. The girl asked in surprise if he had really immobilized him that way. He replied that he probably should have left at least his underwear on. Adele began to laugh, but she was also curious as to how he had ended up in Hans's house. He replied that he was supposed to accompany the princess, but he managed to leave in time when he found out about Adele and her presence in the house. For some reason, Adele felt uncomfortable. She began to feel strange feelings towards this guy. Could Sira have been right, and did she have hidden feelings for her childhood friend? Adele kept this to herself. She no longer wanted to be near the Count. She abruptly removed her hand from the young man and repeated that they should return. After all, people might start gossiping even if they were absent from the party. Christian covered her mouth with his finger. He emphasized that, judging by the noise, someone was looking for her. And it wasn't just one person. If he and Adele were found together in this room, there would definitely be trouble. They had to escape through the window. Chris was already at the window. He reached out his hand to his friend and told her to act quickly, but she just stared at the starry sky. She hadn't felt this way in a long time, but next to the Count, her romantic mood returned. But falling in love with the princess's husband would be a bad idea. So she should refuse. The girl thanked him for offering to help, but she would manage on her own. Eris noticed her change of mood. As they walked along the garden path, the girl told him that she had prepared gifts for the emperor and his family. Christian was curious to know what the girl had prepared for them. He asked if his friend would tell him the secret. The Count believed that he deserved an answer to his question. After all, it was his intervention that had prompted His Highness to visit the confectionery, whose sweets were now enjoyed by the entire palace and the aristocracy. The girl also recalled her childhood when Christian's mother used to treat them to delicious apple pie. If she had known then how things would turn out, she would have written down more recipes for making this delicious treat. The Count said he would be happy to visit her at home to try the pie she had baked herself. The girl replied that she would be delighted to do so, but this time the princess might misunderstand. Christian said that he himself had heard her telling everyone about their relationship as sister and younger brother, so there would be nothing wrong with that. Adele felt ashamed for some reason and couldn't even look him in the eye. The Count said that the more she pushed him away now, the more he wanted to be with her. It was paradoxical, but there was no other way, so she had to agree to stop this. That was the end of their conversation. The girl watched the young man walking away from her. For some reason, she felt uneasy. She was distracted by the thought that she had to return to the hall with the guests. Mia reacted violently to her appearance. Her friend asked where Dale had been. Everyone had been looking for her. Something very interesting had happened. They had found Itona in a rather compromising position, and he couldn't explain what had happened. Mia told her that the princess had also arrived in the meantime, and so they absolutely had to go and greet the noble lady. For some reason, Adele felt uncomfortable at the idea of going to greet the princess, Chris's fiancée. Adele noticed the expression on the emperor's daughter's face. These were the emotions of a girl deeply in love. She couldn't imagine her life without Christian, whom she almost idolized. It was worth playing a role in front of this lovely girl. Adele apologized for not coming to greet them sooner. She had decided to take a walk and relax in the fresh air. April asked if she could invite her to visit the palace. The reason for this request was to learn more about the Count. They had a lot to discuss and talk about in this regard. Adele pretended that she was pleased with the offer, but Chris himself did not like it. April said goodbye to Adele, saying she hoped to see her again in the future. Adele was pleased that the princess trusted her, but she felt guilty for some reason, even though she had done nothing wrong. When the princess and the Count left the room, everyone around them began to whisper about the upcoming wedding. Everyone agreed that the couple was perfect for each other. But there was an obstacle standing in their way. Sierra approached Adele and smiled, saying that luck was on her side today. The girl replied that today it was all over for Eton, but next time she could be in his place. The Marquise's daughter wanted to pretend she didn't understand anything. However, the Marquise's words were very telling. Adele asked her to convey her regards to Madame Hans for her sincerity and hospitality. In the carriage, Mia listened attentively to her friend's account of what had actually happened in her absence. The maid said that Eton was simply insane, as he had proposed to Adele immediately after her father's funeral. Adele told her that Chris had saved her. Her friend was also pleased with the evening, as she had also nearly fainted. However, she would have done so because she had lost the strength to continue dancing and enjoying herself. Mia became angry again when her friend told her about her suspicion that poison had been slipped into her drink. But eventually, Mia calmed down and said that she had partially avenged her friend. At the party, one of the guests pointed out to Sierra that her hair was covered in caramel at the back. Someone had put caramel there, and now she would have to cut her hair because the caramel had hardened and there was no other option. The Count spoke with the princess. She said that Christian had done very well today. April thanked him for a pleasant evening. She also spoke a lot about the Marquise Oswald, who she found pleasant and quite interesting. Chris replied that the princess was also very beautiful and interesting. The girl was pleased to hear the compliment. She even hoped that the Count had feelings for her and that she had a chance for their relationship to develop in the future. Baze kissed April's hand and thanked her for her pleasant company and finally wished her a good night. His manners drove the princess crazy. She wanted the young man to kiss her and then hug her. Adele tried the pie she had baked herself. It was not even close to the one Christian's mother had made. Once again, the girl's thoughts returned to the events at the ball. Once again, the Count filled her thoughts. The girl also remembered her childhood. Her mother was a good baker, so they did not go hungry even in the worst years. Once, among the crowd, they saw a small, frightened boy huddled against the wall. The girl remembered the features of the boy she liked for a long time. People around them gossiped that his mother had run away from the family and his father was working in the mine with all his strength to feed the family. Adele shared her pie with the boy. At first, he was shy about taking sweets, but over time, he began to trust the girl and told her that he was an illegitimate child. And the girl began to feed him. From that moment on, the children became friends. The girl herself did not know what had caused her to become so close to this boy. He was very talented, and over time she taught him to read, play the piano, and dance. Christian followed Adele everywhere, like a puppy. The mother was delighted that, in addition to her daughter, she now had such a beautiful son. Their time together became more and more ordinary and familiar for the children. Those were happy times, but everything changed when the girl turned 18. Then her mother died from the fangs of a beast. The girl was left an orphan. From that time on, Christian began to behave strangely. Adele's friends distracted her from her thoughts. They were impressed that the girl had been baking since early morning. She did not expect her friends to visit so early, so she offered to help. Mia tried the result of their joint efforts. The girl liked it very much and could hardly stop eating it. Then she said that a guest was coming to visit Adele soon. Adele did not understand what she was talking about and was surprised by her friend's knowledge. Later, Mia told her who they should expect. It was her brother Mark, who had to finish working with patients in the area and wanted to stop by to see his sister and Adele. Mia replied that it had been a long time since her brother had separated from his wife. She wanted to support him somehow, but the young man needed the company of a beautiful girl he could talk to. Her friend tried to convince Adele that new acquaintances were very useful. Unless, of course, they were people like Ethan or his close friends. But in fact, Mark had been interested in Adele for a long time and had been trying to get to know her. The shop owner herself didn't like the idea very much. She wanted peace and quiet, but she couldn't refuse her friend. At least she had to get ready for the guest. The girl hadn't even had time to put on any makeup because of work. Finally, the guest arrived. Mia was delighted. Her brother hadn't seen his sister in a long time, so he said he was glad to see her so full of energy. Since childhood, she had been more cheerful and determined than him, more lively. Mia began to introduce her friend to her brother. She suggested that they get to know each other better while she set the table. The girl's older brother was a veterinarian. He apologized for the unexpected visit. Adele assured him that everything was fine and that the guest could come in and enjoy the pie she had just baked. It was time to relax and enjoy the delicious food. Mia and Tanya suddenly remembered some special yarn that needed to be picked up as soon as possible. The yarn turned out to be just an excuse to escape from the house and leave Mark and Adele alone. The girl and her guest sat down. The boy didn't know what to talk about, and the silence wasn't a very good sign. So he asked if things were going better for Madame Oswald. He added that he was glad to hear it. During the conversation, the boy actually showed that he was interested in Adele. He also turned out to be very observant and immediately appreciated his new acquaintance's makeup. He added that he recognized his sister's hand in it. Adele praised him for his observation skills. He replied that he was only attentive to those he was interested in and to whom he was willing to show some interest. But it was time to finally change the subject. Over time, the young man got the impression that she was trying to get rid of him. The girl tried to do everything in a hurry to quickly get rid of his company. Adele was actually not very comfortable in his company. The girl admitted that she felt a little awkward in his company. He agreed, because he also had the same feeling. Mark said that he intended to visit her more often, if possible. In that case, the awkwardness would disappear from their relationship, and they would be able to become friends. Adele thought that the boy was a very nice person and allowed him to bring Jade with him next time so that she wouldn't feel so uncomfortable. Christian suddenly entered the room. He looked closely at the couple. They felt awkward and embarrassed, as if the Count had caught them doing something very indecent. Adele asked why Chris hadn't warned her. He replied that he thought he would get in the way. The girl realized that there was no point in trying to explain, but she still tried to explain that they hadn't done anything wrong, so she introduced the Baron to Chris. Mark shook Christian's hand and said he had heard a lot about him, but the Count replied that he had unfortunately heard nothing about the young man. Bays advised that such meetings should be more formal to avoid awkward situations. The embarrassed Baron said that the introduction would have to be postponed until a later date. Adele was indignant at her friend's behavior, but Mark said that it was time for him to go and that he had enjoyed spending time with her. Mark kissed the girl's hand. He added that he was glad to meet her and was sure they would meet again. This was also intended to anger Christian, who was watching. When the girl and her friend were left alone, Christian looked at her with disapproval. He assured her that he had not expected such behavior from her. Finally, the Count announced that he had brought an invitation from the princess. Adele asked if that was the only reason he had come to see her. Christian replied that he had actually wanted to check if she had forgotten her promise, but it seemed that she had not been expecting him, and he was now superfluous. The young man also noticed that Adele was wearing makeup and had clearly been preparing for the guest's arrival. The Count asked if the girl had really made up her mind and if he should expect her to marry again for convenience. Adele was indignant. She asked what right he had to talk to her like that. Even if she had made up her mind, it was her personal business, and no one else could influence her or tell her what to do. The young man asked if it wasn't her who had said that Chris was like a younger brother to her. So, taking advantage of this position, he expressed his opinion about who she could marry and who she could start a relationship with. Adele said that she had just started a new life and was beginning to shake off the bad reputation that her enemies had spread about her when Count Baze came into her life and she once again became the center of attention. In this case, the wedding would also give her the opportunity to gain a protector of her honor and her position. Besides, she was tired of being lonely all the time. Everyone would change their attitude towards her, and she would start living again. But Christian asked her if her previous experience had taught her nothing. Marriage was not a way out of the situation she was in. The girl replied that she just needed someone she could rely on. And since she had made up her mind, Mark was not a bad choice. He was decent and could be relied upon in difficult times. She had been through a lot and had managed to climb out of a deep pit of despair. Christian said that he had also felt very lonely all these years, but no one knew about it because he simply had no right to show his weakness. And now he was offering her to rely on him instead of Baron Mark. If marriage is necessary for a girl only to be under someone's protection and patronage, then he can take the place of a husband necessary for a normal relationship and security for the future. The girl was tired of this empty conversation because she knew very well about the prospects of Christian's marriage to Princess April. The girl no longer wanted to talk to him about anything or continue communicating with him. When Christian left, Adele watched him for a long time. It hurt her that their relationship had reached such a dead end, and today's conversation was supposed to put an end to all hopes and further conversations. There was really only one way out of the situation. She had to get closer to Mark so that Christian would no longer show his feelings for her. Everyone would calm down and be happy, and nothing would threaten their relationship. Without anyone's help, the girl lived a wonderful life and coped with everything. And now she didn't need any more quarrels or scandals to avoid drawing unnecessary attention to her modest self. She was tired of gossip and ridicule. The girl decided that it was time to stop thinking and hesitating and start doing something basic. Today, she had a lot of orders for the Emperor's palace, and they had to be prepared. Adele called her assistant Tanya to bring flour from the basement. But then she remembered that Tanya had not yet returned, so she would have to go to the basement herself, which she really did not want to do. The girl went down to the basement. The smell of damp and mold began to bother her. However, there was nothing she could do about it, because no one else could handle it. The assistants had disappeared somewhere. Adele remembered events from her past. Back then, the Marquis's servants had locked her in a similar basement and told her that she would have only one candle per day and would have to eat whatever the Marquis left for her. Old memories haunted her. She remembered how the servants mocked her, saying that she was not really a Marquise, but only a toy for the old man. She could not even leave the house without his permission. Suddenly, she heard a strange sound outside. The girl realized that someone had broken into her house. She heard Eaton's voice upstairs. He insisted that there was no point in hiding from him. He and his friends would find her. The girl asked if the humiliation at the dinner party wasn't enough for him. This made Eaton even angrier, and he and his friends started breaking down the door to the basement. Soon, they found Adele. In the carriage, Christian wasn't really listening to his captain's report. The captain said that his boss looked really bad. Had he quarreled with the Marquise, and now they were feeling bad and angry? Chris, on the other hand, asked for a report on Viscount Eaton. This would be the deciding factor in what might happen. Lately, Eaton had been going to the tavern with his friends, and it seemed that he was up to something. Meanwhile, at Adele's house, Eaton and his friends burst into the room. They began to shout loudly and demand that the girl come out to them, but she begged them to stop. Otherwise, Count Weiss would punish them severely. So the company had better leave if they didn't want any trouble. Eaton's friends were frightened. They had never heard that he had secret ties to Voss, so they began to be wary. Eaton ordered them to shut up. After all, he had to avenge the insult he had suffered at the dinner party. But the Viscount's companions were afraid that their victim might take revenge on Viscount Vase himself. Everyone feared and respected him. The girl smelled oil and was terrified. Her house was probably being set on fire. No one cared about her life. Eaton lost his mind after being humiliated at the Hanses' house. He didn't care anymore. Adele wasn't going to accept being a victim. She grabbed a knife and stabbed her attackers. She didn't care whether she hit them or not. The poor girl just begged her attackers to go away. She knew she couldn't handle them on her own, but it was worth trying to at least run out into the street and call for help. Eaton saw that she was only pretending to be brave. Christine intervened. He asked how cowardly they had to be to try to attack a poor girl with 3 of them. The young man continued to address Viscount Eaton, who was hiding. The Count said that he had probably been too polite to the attacker that time, and now he had to pay for his kindness. Chris asked the other criminals to back off and not make things worse. Vase said that when he found the attacker, the least of his problems would be losing consciousness. He asked for forgiveness, saying he was just trying to scare a girl who didn't respect him. Eaton knelt before the Marquise and begged her forgiveness, as Christian had told him to do. The Viscount called himself a fool for coming up with such an idiotic idea and bringing his friends along with him. Adele held the knife in her hands and begged him never to show his face to her again. She was ready to forgive her stepson for such a humiliating act one last time. He promised never to bother her again. The attackers grabbed their wounded comrade and took her with them. They looked like a pack of beaten dogs that had done something wrong and were now trying to escape punishment. They didn't care about their leader. The Count and Adele were left alone. The girl did not know how to react to his appearance in the house. Shock and numbness from nerves would not let her rest. She sank helplessly to the floor in front of the man. The girl replied that she could not stand on her feet, so she would ask him to help her get to bed. He understood that she couldn't do without him, and old grievances and memories disappeared in a cloud of kindness and affection. The Count picked up his friend and carried her to her room, away from the basement and the events that had taken place there. After that day, Adele would not be able to react normally to basements and similar structures for a long time. Adele felt good around this boy. She felt safe with him. Even though her legs and arms were shaking, he protected her and was ready to come to her aid at any moment. If only Princess April hadn't been there. Christian carefully laid his friend on the bed. She couldn't understand how to react to their relationship in the future. As soon as she tried to turn away from him, something happened and he saved her. The young man noticed an old wound on the girl's arm. Adele asked him not to panic. She promised to take care of everything herself. He asked her why she was so beautiful even after such an extreme situation. The Count sat in a chair by the bed. He asked his friend not to think about anything, but just to rest. The girl replied that she definitely couldn't sleep. Christian asked if she was hungry or wanted some wine. Adele refused. She felt strange. She didn't feel like eating at all. She couldn't figure out what to say in this situation. The girl was frightened by the thought that Christian was going to leave. He promised that he would only be gone for a short while. The young man reminded her that he was going to look for some food. Perhaps her friends had already returned and would help him. Soon, the Count would be back, and she would be with him. Finally, Chris returned with a pie and a glass of milk. He urged his friend to eat something. Her body needed as much food as possible to cope with the stress she had recently experienced. When Adele resisted and refused to do so, he forcefully brought a piece of pie to her mouth and ordered her to bite it and chew it so that she could then wash it down with milk and swallow it without any problems. She was lucky that her attackers had not beaten her. Christian said he wouldn't ask for anything in return for saving her. However, she had to fulfill one request. The girl promised that she would try to do whatever circumstances demanded of her. Chris replied that he wouldn't ask for anything difficult. He just wanted to stay at her house. That was the essence of his request. But he would not do so permanently, only for a short time so as not to upset her. Adele could not believe what she was hearing. She asked in horror if he really wanted to stay with her. He replied that he planned to take control of the Imperial Guard and needed a base. The house he had found for himself needed renovating, but now the question was where he would live in the meantime. So Christian would take the ground floor for a short time, as no one lived there anyway. The girl said they had already discussed this. He assured her that her future husband would understand. the Count himself was ready to explain the essence of his plan to him. Adele said that was not what she meant. The princess should also understand everything. She knew about her fiancé's secret plans. But there was nothing unusual or terrible about old friends spending some time together. Everyone considered them almost relatives. Adele suddenly thought about what would have happened to her if Christian had not intervened in time. Her house and she herself could have suffered. So the girl did not feel ready to refuse. She couldn't stop thinking about how Christian had managed to come to her aid. After all, he should have passed her house long ago and returned to his estate. How he ended up at her house remained a mystery. Adele asked how he knew she was in danger. The girl received no answer. Her friend simply hinted that he had very keen hearing. And again he returned to the topic of whether she would allow him to stay. Finally, the girl agreed to his conditions. However, only until his house was repaired. She had no strength or opportunity to refuse the Count when he smiled so beautifully. Christian replied that when the time came to return to his home, Adele would beg him to stay, but he would not give in to her. The girl thought it sounded a little selfish, but she forgave him. When she started eating, Adele realized that her friend had added sugar to her milk. It reminded her of her childhood, when her mother did the same thing. Adele couldn't sleep, and her mother gave her hot milk with sugar to help her sleep better. She once told Chris about this, not thinking much of it. He remembered and did the same thing to calm her down and distract her from her worries and anxieties. Adele asked him why he remembered, but her childhood friend didn't want to talk about it. He urged her to finally eat properly and rest, but he didn't want to eat himself. The pie was clearly not made for him. The girl replied that he might not believe her, but she had made the charlotte especially for him, just like her mother used to make for them when they were children. But the pie didn't even come close to how it was supposed to be. The young man leaned toward her and said that in that case she should feed him. He had fed her, so now it was her turn to worry about him. He didn't ask for much, just to taste one piece and enjoy it. When he finally took a bite, he said it was delicious. The girl's heart leapt out of her chest and she couldn't calm down. Christian's closeness had a strange effect on her. Her heart was racing. Adele decided to pretend she wanted to sleep. She lay down on the bed. Christian asked if he should stay with her. The girl replied that she could manage on her own so he could go about his business and get settled. The girl lay in bed and wondered if she could hide all the feelings she had for her friend. When they were together, something unusual happened between them, and it was difficult to resist. Suddenly, he kissed her and said that the pie was just as delicious as the first time. He liked it very much, and for that, Christian would always be on guard so that no one would dare to hurt his girlfriend. The confused girl wondered if everything would really be all right from now on. After all, it would be difficult to hide the Count's presence in her house, and then the gossip about her and her friend would start again. Christian stood in the room with Viscount Eton. The latter was tied up. The Count reminded him that he should have listened to him the first time so that this would not happen again. With a sharp movement of his sword, the young man cut the rope that covered the Viscount's mouth. The latter begged for mercy, because that was what the Count had promised him at the time. The Count ordered him to be silent, answer questions, and listen carefully. Christian promised that if he heard even one word of a lie from the Viscount, he would cut him into very small pieces with his sword, and would not regret it. No one would even guess that he had done such a thing. The Viscount promised that he would do and say everything that was required of him. The Count asked why he had come back and started bothering the Marquise. After all, last time he had been made to understand who was protecting her. The young man replied that he was very angry with her for rejecting his proposal. Christian asked if it was the proposal he had made immediately after his father's death, without waiting for the funeral. Christian asked if the son knew anything about his father's poisoning. He denied knowing anything about it, but it seemed that he himself had taken part in it, and the Count readily believed in such a course of events. The young man emphasized that it was the Marquise herself who prepared all the food that was served at the table. So suspicion immediately fell on her. Adele had taken care of her husband from the very beginning of their marriage and relationship. The boy said that she was considered the Marquise in name only because from the very beginning of the marriage she was kept in the basement and was even called the Princess of the Basement by the servants. The Oswalds needed a maid. The old Marquis was unable to move. He was in poor health, but someone had to agree to be his wife. Adele needed help and protection, so she agreed to take on the role. It seemed like the best option, rather than someone from outside the family revealing that a member of a powerful family was on his deathbed. But now Christian was interested in whether the girl's father knew about all this. Eaton replied that he was the first to come to the Oswalds and offer his daughter as a servant. After all, he needed money, and his daughter was a ticket to wealth and a better life. The sale of the girl into slavery to that family took place with the full consent, if not the blessing and initiative, of her own father. After all, he wanted to become noble and live a good and wealthy life without any problems. Christian asked the boy how he knew so much about the Oswalds and the Grills. He replied that he was a distant relative of the Grills on his mother's side. The Count suspected that he was being lied to, but there was another important detail. If a girl, even one you really liked, had poisoned your father, you would never, under any circumstances, ask her to marry you before your ancestor's funeral and mourning period. So now the Count asked one last time who really killed Oswald Sr. And if the boy lied again, he would pay dearly for his words. He tried to say that he knew nothing and did not understand the suspicion. But when Christian's sword approached his throat, Eaton said that it was the work of the Marquise's eldest son. His name was Stone, and he was willing to do anything for power. The Marquis's other children supported his plan. Eaton added that the Marquise was very fond of her husband and could not have poisoned him. On the day of his father's death, the servants saw Adele arguing with Stone and trying to dissuade him. The eldest son's motive became increasingly clear. He wanted to get his father's power and wealth before he died of natural causes. But it was also interesting why Adele herself had remained silent all these years of abuse and lies. Eaton asked if what he had said was enough. After all, he wanted to get out and never see the Earl again under any circumstances. Christian agreed. He was going to keep his promise. The young man turned away from Eaton, and the Marquis's son thought that no matter how famous a warrior he was, he could still die at the hands of an assassin who would attack him unexpectedly and strike him in the back. His free hands gave him the opportunity to act. Eaton took advantage of this. He swung at the Count while he had his back turned. But the veteran of many wars and battles was constantly on guard and ready to repel the attack. Eaton stood there in amazement. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. His mind refused to accept what was in front of him. On the wall was the shadow of a huge creature that resembled a giant wolf on its hind legs. The captain waited for Christian with a set of clothes and ready to carry out all his orders. The Count emphasized that an investigation should be launched against the Oswald family and to pay attention to Stone Oswald. After that, the captain was finally ordered to leave and take the things to Adele's house. The assistant was not surprised, but in his state, he would not even dare to say anything against the will of his master and lord. The captain understood that his master was concerned about the fate of his friend, who had been the target of several assassination attempts and attempts to discredit her already tarnished reputation. Otherwise, she could simply die one day. But to leave no doubt about his loyalty to the Emperor, Chris informed the captain of a secret mission to find a secret document in Adele's house. The document concerned the affairs of the late Marquis. The young man asked his master if this meant that he had deliberately gained the trust of his maid and was trying to sneak into the house to get hold of the Marquis's documents. The captain tried to believe it. But when he remembered how his master lost control of his emotions when the girl was around, he found it hard to believe that he was driven by rational motives. Adele woke up in the middle of the night from a terrible dream. She saw again the scene in the forest when her mother was found torn apart by a beast. At that moment, the girl lost all hope and expectations for a bright future. The poor Marquise decided to drink some wine. Over time, milk with sugar no longer calmed her, but had become more of a tradition. She was afraid that she might become addicted to alcohol. The girl noticed a chest of drawers standing nearby. Most likely, during Christian's fight with his attackers, someone had knocked it over, and now the door hung crookedly. But something was waiting for Adele in the chest. Hidden inside was an empty document signed by the Duke of Valencia, the current emperor. There was nothing unusual about it. She had obtained the document 8 years ago and taken it with her. In the morning, Adele was awakened by her maid Tatiana. The girl asked what had happened, but Tatiana replied that it was not time to sleep. There were many guests waiting outside. They were representatives of various social classes. Christian's assistant entered the room, instructing the servants where to put things and what needed to be repaired first in the house. Adele guessed that her friend was moving into her home. Still, just in case, she asked what was going on and who all these people were. The captain explained that the Count had given him full moral authority to remodel the old, unusable things in the house and make repairs. The assistant said that he was just trying to make things comfortable for his master and had completely forgotten about the housekeeping. Fortunately, he realized that he was doing something wrong. The captain explained that when the lady wished, after the Count left, they would return everything to the way it was before. They felt awkward and uncomfortable with such a question, as if they were going to be dismissed. The friend said that they were not at all opposed to the repairs, as they had been thinking about them for a long time, so they would not mind if the craftsman worked on the house and its interior decoration. The assistant was satisfied. Adele was delighted that her house would be renovated just like that, but the pace and the attempts to transform everything she was so used to surprised and confused her. She was even more annoyed by the wallpaper, which was completely unsuitable. Finally, Christian himself arrived. He entered the house and asked if he had the right address, because everything around him was so clean and fresh, remodeled to suit the needs of the marquise and her distinguished guest. The Count asked why his faithful servant had decided to take matters into his own hands in this case. He had never ordered him to completely remodel his mistress's house. The servant apologized for his enthusiasm. Christian said that in that case, he would have to answer for his mistake. The girls were frightened. They did not want the young man to suffer because of them. But it was not yet clear what the Count would try to do to him. Adele stood up for the assistant. She stood in front of Christian, who had already almost drawn his sword, and said that she liked what was happening. So there was no need to shed blood in her house, even if it had been remodeled. The girl continued to say that it was her initiative to renovate the house. It would be payment for Christian's stay in her house once his estate had been thoroughly renovated. The young man doubted that his girlfriend wanted to put such wallpaper in the house. She also emphasized that she was simply delighted with how the craftsman had transformed her modest house into such luxury. The Count asked his assistant if the girl was telling the truth. He replied that she was not. She had not ordered this, but was simply a kind lady trying to intercede for him and protect him from Mr. Christian's wrath. The girl asked the captain to reconsider and say that he had made a mistake and had received direct orders from her. Otherwise, he would be severely punished and could even be sentenced to death for offenses against his master. He refused, showing his stubbornness. The girl spoke to her friend and asked him not to shed blood in her house and to have mercy on her faithful servant, who had only thought of the welfare of his commander's home. Christian asked if the girl really thought that he would swing his sword in someone else's home and try to kill his loyal vassal and assistant, who was his right hand and served him faithfully. The girl was told that whenever the commander was dissatisfied, he always had his weapons cleaned. Adele relaxed. She had not expected such a turn of events and had been a little hasty in her conclusions about Chris. Meanwhile, the Count ordered everything in the house to be redone immediately. The assistant was shocked by his commander's lack of taste. The young man thought about how much he would have to change and repair. By evening, Adele was studying documents. She had to keep track of a large number of deliveries as the volume of orders was growing with each passing day. She thought it would be difficult to handle everything on her own. A sleepless night lay ahead as the dough had to be left to rest and rise. On top of everything else, she was worried about how Chris's stay in her house would be perceived. The aristocrats would have to react. Adele turned her attention to the flour. She had to tell Tanya to go to the basement and bring up a bag of flour, because she would need a lot of it today to make desserts and cookies for all the customers. But her thoughts turned to Christian. He had said that he would not be coming home today. He would stay at the palace, perhaps even spend the night with the princess and rest. He would spend the night with her. But suddenly, Chris walked into her room. He asked why she was still awake at such a late hour. The girl felt awkward. She didn't expect to see him in her room at such a late hour, so she was confused. Adele approached Christian and took his hand. She saw his calloused, strong hands and said that tonight they could do it together. He did not expect such a proposal and was taken aback.